Since the beginning of this pandemic, all over the world, touch became something that people were missing. Sunset sketch was actually, I was doing that while I was on the phone with a friend who was sitting and watching the sun set while I was watching the sun rise. I write a lot of stuff on piano and then I translate that into tracks and then find sounds. I like to find analogies in music. I've always been doing that since I was a kid.
Hello, Karsh. Thank you so much for joining us today. Congratulations on releasing your 6th album, Touch. We loved it. It was beautiful. My personal favorites are Lovers and Fist of Fury. And I should mention that when I was listening to Sunset Sketch right after Fist of Fury, the transition was beautiful. How did you create something like this during the pandemic?
Well, it started back in March of 2020 when I was leaving India and I was coming to the States for about 3 weeks, and I was supposed to return back to Goa. I had about 3-4 shows in Chicago and New York and Los Angeles. And upon arriving in the States, one by one, each show got canceled. And then all of a sudden I was grounded in New York. I have a place in Brooklyn, but I was not planning on staying there. So all of a sudden I was there, and the pandemic started, and we were in lockdown, and there was just a lot of crazy chaos that was happening in New York at that time. The Black Lives Matter movement was happening at the same time that there was a lockdown, and I was separated from a lot of people that I was, a lot of loved ones. I hadn't seen my family, so I started writing music, and a lot of the tracks, at least half of the tracks that I did during lockdown in Brooklyn. And then finally in August, I was able to get to Goa after many attempts of trying to get a ticket. I finally was able to come to Goa and spent the next 6 months working on more music again in lockdown, but now in India. So that became this collection of music. Actually, Touch right now, Touch 1 is the first part of Touch, and Touch 2 will be coming out in July.
Awesome. Could you tell us why the name Touch? Was there a specific reason behind the name?
Yeah, I mean, Touch, I think since the beginning of this pandemic, all over the world, touch became something that people were missing. We were isolated from our neighbors and our family and our loved ones, and husbands and wives were not able to see each other, and people were not able to see their children, and touch became, and we were talking on Zoom calls. So touch became something very, I think we were all longing for it and pining for human touch. So that became the theme of the album.
Yeah, thank you for bringing in some touch into our lives. It sounded great. How did you rope in Indian folk singer and Padma Shri Malini Awasthi?
Well, Malini ji and myself, we were in the studio together about 3 years ago, working on a piece of music. And before we started working on the piece, we just did some initial sound check, kind of alap type stuff. And she was just vamping. And so I had those recordings, which I had put aside and hadn't opened for years. And then during the pandemic, I opened up one of the pieces and just started writing something around it, writing a piece of music around the vocals, and then started arranging the vocals, and sent it to her, and she loved it, and so we agreed that we should put this out as a piece of music.
Yeah, the end product was amazing. It's one of our favorites right now.
I mean, the inspiration for the track was definitely about, it was about lovers being apart and being in different. I knew so many stories of people who were, separated from lovers and on different continents, on opposite sides of the world, for months and months and months without being able to see each other. So that was what the inspiration for that piece was.
So we have always seen that you collaborate with amazing musicians for all your tracks. Was there a specific reason why you didn't collaborate for Touch, of course, except for one collaboration? Did you want to go solo?
Yeah, I mean, more than anything, it was, due to the pandemic, the inability to be able to get together with other artists and do the things that we usually do when we collaborate, because it's not just about getting in the studio and singing on a piece of music. There's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of time spent, a lot of laughter, disagreements, things like that get to the good stuff. And I felt like, usually when I work on music, I create a blueprint, and then I bring that to the different artists, and then they interpret whatever it is that I've done. Whereas in this case, I kind of kept it, I kept the blueprints the way that they were.
Wonderful. So you just mentioned about your inspiration for the song Lovers. In your own words, can you please describe the other tracks in the album, especially Fist of Fury?
Well, Fist of Fury is a continuation. I have what I call liquid tabla tracks that I always put out, which are usually very kind of tabla-driven electronic tracks, which I've been doing since the first album. So I started with a track called One Step Beyond, and then that continued on the next album with a track called GK2, and then the next album there was this track called Newborn Star, and then so these are, and they all kind of, if you listen to them back to back, they're all very kind of tabla-driven, aggressive tracks, and also there's a little bit of the Bruce Lee inspiration to this series of tracks that I call Liquid Tabla. So Fist of Fury being also a title of a Bruce Lee
yes
film. I've also done a track called Be Like Water, and they're all tabla, electric tabla tracks.
Yes. Wow. Okay, and what about Sunset Sketch?
Sunset Sketch was actually, I was doing that while I was on the phone with a friend who was sitting and watching the sunset while I was watching the sunrise.
Okay.
In New York. So she was in Bombay and I was in New York, and so that was kind of the, and she was telling me about what the sunset and sending me photographs of what the sunset was looking like, and I was sending photographs of what the sunrise was looking like, and so that was what the inspiration for that piece.
Beautiful. The song has come out really, really well. And when I was just listening to all the songs, and like I just mentioned, the transition after Fist of Fury and Sunset Sketch was like, wow, it just took me somewhere else. So it was beautiful.
Well, I think that, it's funny because when I first started working on these tracks, I had them in kind of, I was working on a few tracks that were like Fist of Fury, a few tracks that were like Sunset Sketch, and kind of had them in categories. And I started to realize that, like, even the way that I was coming up with these ideas, and I was jumping between different emotions, on any given day, we were all put through a roller coaster of emotions. So by the end of working on this, I felt like the way to tell this story would be to kind of bring us all into that kind of schizophrenic, not schizophrenic necessarily, but, that emotional roller coaster type of story, as opposed to a consistent, say, dance album or album of just tabla tracks.
I think you've added an emotional touch to this album.
So let's talk about the production of this album. How did you manage to produce it, especially remotely and during the pandemic? How did you do it?
Well, I mean, nowadays it's quite easy. We all have our mobile studios, so I'm basically working off of my laptop. So I have a studio in Goa and I have a studio in Brooklyn, which I just basically bring my laptop and plug into, and then I have all of my gear there and, most of what I need to be able to produce. It's obviously, I'm not, recording orchestras and working with choirs and things like that on this album. So I was able to kind of do everything in a contained space.
How long did the whole process take, like for all the tracks?
It took, I'd say it took a year. It took pretty much all of 2020 to finish most of these tracks. like I said, this is only the first half. The second half is another 5 tracks that are coming out in July called Touch
Not
2.
wait.
Yeah, I can't wait either. You just mentioned that you used a very close setup for this first part of the album. But over the past 20 years, you've been a renowned tabla player, DJ, remix artist, and multi-instrumentalist. Could you please describe or tell us what are the instruments you used in this album?
I mean, I definitely use tabla as a kind of a spine throughout the album, even in the ballads. And I was trying to achieve a little bit of a different sound with the tabla as well. Whereas a Fist of Fury is a bit in your face, the tabla becomes the main voice. And otherwise, on other tracks, I tried to keep it ornamental, sometimes percussive, sometimes very vocal. And then the other instruments I was mainly working within Logic. So I use a lot of keyboards, I play a lot of piano. I write a lot of stuff on piano, and then I translate that into tracks and then find sounds within a lot of the synths that I use within Logic. And then of course there's some guitar, there's some acoustic guitar. On the album that's coming out, on the Touch 2 album, there's a track that I collaborated with Warren Mendonça and Dragusani. So there's a guitar heavy track. But mainly it's me and on my computer with Logic and my piano and my sounds.
Right. Okay. When you were just talking about the instruments that you used, do you have any process for your composition?
Process, like I said, most of the melodic pieces happen on piano. Mm-hmm. They happen while I sit down on piano, and then once I've fleshed out an idea or a story, then I take it to Logic. Okay. And then I usually will find a different sound to replay the composition. But when it comes to tracks, it starts from many different places. Sometimes it comes from a tabla part that I find a very cool space with an electronic beat that I've programmed. And then I'll start from there and start building, sometimes melodically, sometimes sonically, and the tracks are very diverse on this album. There's a couple of tracks, like I said, once you hear the second half, you'll see how diverse it gets, because, the first half kind of gives you an idea of something, and then the second half takes you on a completely different type of journey.
Wow. So
there's some stuff that's very minimal dance type music. There's some stuff that's very heavy, or kind of not orchestral, but it's very lush, melodic stuff. And I've used samples, because I wasn't working with a lot of artists. So I was using like sarangi samples and different samples just as ornamentation for certain tracks. But there's no one method for me. I always start with a blank slate, and it could start with a guitar part. It could start with a vocal. It could start with just a drum part. It really comes from anywhere.
Interesting. And you've hyped the second part of the album so much that I can't wait to listen to it.
We can't wait to listen to the second part.
Yeah.
So,
we'll share it with you.
Oh yeah, can't wait for it. So where do you draw inspiration from while creating, the unique sounds like our former American president once said that, you mix eclectic sounds with, like our own heritage to create your own distinct sound. So where are you usually inspired from?
I'm always listening. I think that I like to find analogies in music. I've always been doing that since I was a kid. So I would hear something in a pop song that was analogous to something I had heard in a film song or in a classical piece of music, or, and sometimes that happens with visual art. You see something and it evokes a sound, and for me, when I'm producing music, I'm always in search of a sound that I hear in my head. And those things come together because I'm listening to lots of different types of music. I listen to everything from classical music to to R&B music, to hip hop music, to electronic music, ambient, jazz. You know, I'm constantly changing my input, so I'm not listening to the same thing. So that oftentimes I think that just mixes in my own consciousness, and then I come with a particular idea that I have in my head, but I'm still looking at a blank canvas, and then I have to, you know, spend the time producing and making mistakes until I finally arrive at the sound that I heard initially in my inspiration.
And do you get satisfied with the sound instantly, or is there a lot of back and forth that goes into it?
There's a lot of back and forth, but there's always that moment. You know, I can spend months working on a track because I keep on working on it, and it's not leaving me with that feeling. But as soon as I arrive at that place with a piece of music, even if it's unfinished, but when I know that I've arrived at the crux of it, this is what it's really about, then I feel like that's, for me, that's the most successful moments as a composer, as a producer, is when you have that, when you find that sound, when you're like, yes, this is exactly what I was trying to do.
What would be a message to the artists who just entered the industry, upcoming artists who are entering the industry?
Well, I think that what I see happening a lot right now, because there is such a incredible saturation of incredibly talented musicians and so much music that's coming out, there does tend to be a tendency to quickly copy or imitate what we see. And I would remind young artists that their strongest asset is their originality, and to keep that in mind and be inspired by other artists' originality, as opposed to becoming inspired by other people's style.
Let's quickly go to the rapid fire round. An artist you would love to collaborate with?
Radiohead.
Okay.
Nice.
Or Tom York.
Is there a musician that you would call yourself a fanboy of? I mean, I'm sure there are many.
Peter Gabriel, Radiohead. I mean, even the musicians that I've been able to work with, I'm still a fanboy. You know, people like Zakir Hussain and Sting.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I'm still a huge fan of them, and they're huge inspirations to me. You know, I'm very, very, very lucky to have been able to collaborate with them. Yeah, and I remain a fanboy of most. I mean, you know, I'm becoming a fanboy of younger artists as well.
Can you name a few for us?
I'm definitely a big fan of an artist named Thundercat. Been listening to a lot of his stuff.
Okay.
And so many different artists. This House of Waters, which is a great band from the States. Priya Darshini, and these are all people that I collaborate with as well. But you know, big fan of what they do as artists.
An artist you could never get tired listening to?
Stevie Wonder.
An instrument you would love to learn if you had the chance?
Well, I do play guitar, but I've always wanted to be a better guitar player. So if that, and the flute, the flute has always eluded me. I pick up a flute and I just cannot make any noise. And I would love to be able to, but I love flute. I have so much flute in my music that I would have loved to have been a flute player.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your time. This is about it. And we can't wait for your second album. Part two of the album. And
great. It'll be coming soon.
Yeah, and given half a chance for us to listen to it before the release.
We'll send you guys a preview of the album before it comes out as well.
Thank you so much.
We can't wait.
Waiting. All the best and stay safe, and talk to you soon.